Good morning once again in Green Spring. You may have seen Ron Willard distributing the Washington Post Express to the 3 clubhouses and to Garden Ridge. And ever wonder why he's willing to do that? Well, maybe we'll find out on this segment of Who's Who. But first, Ron, I'd like to talk a little bit about your family and understand a little bit more about what you did as a kid and all that sort of thing. Would you tell us about your immediate family?
Well, I was born in June of 1939. I was the 5th of a total of 7 children, 4 girls and 3 boys. I have 2 older brothers. I had 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters, 2 younger sisters. There was a lot of activity, and being in Maine, we were living in the wintertime, which is fairly long in Maine, can be. Is in confined spaces.
We'll talk about the winters in Maine here in a minute.
Later,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But the thing that evolved from my family was my mother had gone to become a teacher. She had gone to Gorham Normal School at the time. Later, Gorham State Teachers College. It became that. And my father had gone 1 year to college. His father, whom I never knew, was a country doctor in Bryant Pond. He had moved from New Hampshire after practicing there a short time and had originally come from Vermont, northern Vermont, and that's where my father was born. And that's where we grew up in western Maine. And my father worked in the mills, and my mother was a teacher in country schools, and for a number of years she taught in the town where Sunday River now is, Newry, and grades 3 through 8 in the same room. Yeah. Sometimes having 5 teachers, and that's basically, we grew up there and went all to schools there in Woodstock and then moved to Bethel.
Yeah, you indicated on your bio that you lived in Woodstock, and I tried to look Woodstock up in my road atlas, and I didn't find Woodstock in my road atlas. I found North Woodstock and I found South Woodstock. And then when I looked at the map, I saw where they were, and I saw Bryant Pond was between them. And I figured that maybe we were talking about the town of Woodstock, which incorporated an area that had some villages in it. Is that the case?
Well, people there pay taxes to Woodstock. It's the whole town is incorporated as Woodstock. Bryant Pond is the name of the town after a Bryant. There were a number of Bryants living in Bryant Pond. That's the community or settlement. And that's where it became famous for the phone company there. And the railroad ran through there. My grandfather practiced medicine there. My father would catch the railroad there and go up to Bethel to go to Gould Academy for his secondary education. And then he'd ride the train back in the afternoon.
Yeah. Well, your current family, though, you have a couple of children. You have a wife and 2 children.
Right.
Could you tell us a little bit about those people?
My wife Joan and she's also from Maine. I met her teaching in Bethel at the end of her teaching in the town. And we have two sons, and the oldest son has 3 sons, and the oldest is, 2 of the oldest sons have graduated from Chantilly High School. And the oldest son has graduated from Virginia Tech and is a computer engineer in the area. Soon after he graduated, he started employment here in Northern Virginia. And the second son is a computer specialist student, junior at George Mason University, where both his uncle went and graduated, and where his father and his mother too graduated from George Mason University. So.
Now, there's something special about your grandson, Zachary.
Zachary, the oldest son, the youngest of my oldest son's 3 boys, was born on February 29th, 2000. So he should always remember how old he is.
So he's only about 4 years old.
Right. He's only 4 years old, right?
I guess it's not 4 years old, but it's, what would we call it, 4 terms old?
And he is a junior at Oakton High School, where his mother had graduated from Oakton High School.
Well, then let's go back to Woodstock. Woodstock is famous for one thing, and that, the last crank system, is that?
That's right. And I thought at the time when that became famous, and there were articles in Time magazine and many of the newspapers and media, many of the residents that they interviewed at the time had been brought into this world probably by my grandfather, who was I think the only physician ever to live and practice in Bryant Pond. But that's just the way it worked out. And we used to drive by where that operator was many times when we lived in North Woodstock, because to get into Bryant Pond, we'd usually go by that establishment, a home it was in a home, part of a home, and that's where the phone system was.
Okay.
Receiving calls in from Norway, they'd come in from Norway, and then they'd spread out.
And that's Norway, Maine.
Norway, Maine,
and
right.
We talked about Moscow, Maine, and now we got Norway, Maine.
Right.
All right.
But that's why it became famous, and I think it was in the 1980s that was on there. But
it's kind of interesting that you're only a few miles away from the Telstar Earth satellite station.
Right, in the same school district as it worked out at that time. Andover might have left by now, but the same school district was the Andover Earth satellite station, which went in the early 60s. And the last magneto crank phone system in North America was in Woodstock. So those two things going on at in the same school district.
Yeah. Now your mother was a teacher, right?
Right.
Did she teach
She taught elementary school up through 8th grade.
Okay.
And
how long did she teach?
She taught many years. Many years. Once she did some substituting when the children in my family were young, and then she taught primarily. She taught in Greenwood, where there's a ski area, and she also taught in a number of years in Newry.
And your dad?
And Dad he was a mill worker. He worked in a clothespin factory in Woodstock for a number of years. I think it's around 13. And then when we moved to Bethel in 1950, he became a foreman in a dowel mill. And they'd make glue pins for furniture manufacturing and ship them to North Carolina and mid-Ohio and all over the country. Certain places in the country that you manufacturing wood furniture and needed the glue pins to help fasten them together, as I understand it.
Yeah. Now, I'm sure many of us are interested about the snow in Maine. Your Woodstock is not quite halfway up, I guess, but it's well inside. It's north, and I suspect has a lot of snow.
A lot of snow, right. I never knew track the inches, but I can remember that we lived on a field adjacent to a field, and the wind would come across and draft. The snow would be fairly high, I'd say 10 to 15 feet high, and we could do tunnels in the snow because it would be no snow next to the residents. The way the wind comes, it would blow it away from the residents and drift up into these huge drifts.
You were lucky then.
So it's better to have the snow in a way next to your residents because it would provide insulation, actually.
Well,
there's something to be said for that.
Yeah. Well,
and then there was just the worst snow, though, we endowed with inches was when I worked at Naval Air Station Brunswick along the coast, which they budgeted for 90 inches at the Naval Air Station in the 70s when I worked there. And in 1969-70, they received 150 inches. I mean, that was just a fantastic amount of snow. And their budget was just blown. The Naval Air Station just blew their budget as far as snow removal.
I'll bet. All right, you went to a special high school, Gould High School. Actually, it's Gould Academy.
Right. Up until the mid-'60s, until Telstar was created, high school, also located in Bethel, became the regional high school. Gould Academy served as a dormitory. 50% of the students lived in a dormitory, and they'd come there primarily for college prep. But Gould also offered commercial courses program for typists and other commercial shorthand at the time and other commercial business courses. And it had an industrial arts program, and the same coach that came there as a basketball coach had my father on a team in 1929 when he graduated. And when he retired from coaching, stayed on, but he left coaching in 1956. My older brother, was a captain of the
Well, how
basketball.
big is Gould?
Gould's around 300 then.
Then?
It's less now. I'd say 150 to 200. Primarily dormitory, but there are some local students. Faculty members can go there at a special rate or next to nothing.
Does it now offer high school to the local populace at tuition free? I presume you went tuition free, is that?
Well, what it worked in New England, it was the same way in New Hampshire when I taught in New Hampshire at an academy. As a local student, they count up how many students were from Bethel and how many of them from Newry and all the surrounding towns, and each town would pay $400 or a certain rate to the high school for that year, as long as that student was in there. And a student attended that each year. They'd keep a count on the number, and each town would have to reimburse the school for that student. They wouldn't pay, of course, dormitory space and things like that, or boarding, but that was the rate established between the school that served as a local high school.
Did you have any special experiences at Gould?
Did I have any special experiences?
Yeah, anything that's...
I was involved to some extent in the camera club running. I wasn't an expert on it, but I did some camera work. And I was manager of a basketball team when my brother was hadn't evolved as an athlete really, as I did later as a speed skating and skating, because of my just getting over the period when I couldn't do any athletic endeavors because
you had
of
problems
my knee,
with your knees,
my bad knee. So I did serve as a manager of the basketball team, and we got to travel around some, and that was an experience. And the camera club and certain other activities, plays. I was in some other plays, senior play, and things of that nature. Active in the church youth organization.
Well, there's one thing about Gould that kind of interested me, and that was the winter competition. You had a period of time that was just devoted to winter competition in different sports and activities. And that was the whole school participated, I presume.
Well, I don't remember that too much during my period. They had a very good ski team, very full. They had a jump for jump out in the Sunday River area. There was a large hill there, and they had a jump, and they had their own downhill and slalom and cross country. So they had all the skiing, and then so a lot of people went in that. They didn't have the ice rinks with Zambonis and all that. They had outdoor rinks for people like me to skate on when we had the opportunity, and we could do that in the town too.
Well, when you graduated from Gould, you decided to go to William and Mary, and down here in Virginia.
Right.
How did you? Was it the snow that drove you away from Maine, or?
It just evolved. I mean, there was no one that told me to go or didn't tell me to go. Yeah. If I asked questions, I could get some answers, but I didn't probably maybe know enough to ask any good questions. So I picked it as sort of, I take a chance. Yeah. And it worked out. I was very fortunate, and overall at William and Mary to have some very thoughtful and roommates and friends, and at William and Mary I made many good friends.
Were they from the Virginia area?
Right, right. Yeah. Mostly from Virginia. Roughly, the ratio at William and Mary is roughly 70 to 30. 70% Virginia, because it's a state-supported university, and 30% from outside, all over the world. I met students from Great Britain. We have a very good, strong, William and Mary is very closely connected to Great Britain, and would have exchange students there. And I met a few of them, and it's very interesting. And they were very active on campus.
Well, when you went there, Williamsburg wasn't all that, wasn't as built up, I presume.
No.
Very little activity, or was there?
The highlight of I was just there a short time in September 1957 when the Queen and Prince Philip came to visit for the 350th celebration of Jamestown. Yeah. They stopped at the college because it's William and Mary. They had to stop at William and Mary, right? So I can remember seeing them very close at the Wren building, exchanging gifts with the governor and the president of the college and all that. I mean, that was some experience for somebody who just came out of the woods of northern Maine, right? What's going on here?
Yeah. Well, you went into the Army Reserve. Would you tell us a little bit about
Right.
that?
After teaching a year, I was advised by local, somebody who ran my father's mill, was on the draft board, and he advised me to do something with the draft. So I joined. I had taken 2 years of Army ROTC, so I was aware of the Army, okay. To some extent.
Yeah.
So I joined the Army Reserves, and I had to be on active duty. In the fall of 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, I was in basic training, which never forget that experience. I mean, it was very scary, and we were happened to be located right next to McGuire Air Force Base, with engines for 2 weeks on full alert, with noise, buildings shaking, the air barracks shaking at night because of the engine, whatever they do, tune-ups, I guess, and they're ready to take off.
I was a little concerned during that period too. I was in the Army also.
Right.
Well, you taught after you taught it for a year down at Newport News, and then you went back up into the Northeast again. To
right.
Derry.
I applied in New Hampshire and was taught there 2 years. I could have gone back. I had a contract for a third year, but what happened was just a coincidence. I had a confrontation with a student in the hallway, and the student hit me in the face. I mean, that was a limit. Some of the students there were there only to serve their time until they were 16, when they could quit school and go to work, maybe try to go to work at Derry Shoe, or one of the others. There were 2 or 3 other shoe companies in Derry, and many of them would try to get, what were they going to do after they quit high school? I mean, at that period, when they wanted to stay in the area, most of them would try to work in the shoe companies.
Now,
But anyway, that was why I didn't return, and I was intending. I did take a few additional economic business courses at University of New Hampshire. That's why we moved to Portsmouth. My wife started teaching. Joan started teaching at Portsmouth.
So you were married at this time.
Beg your pardon?
You were married at this time.
Oh yes, I married in '64 because I had met and dated my wife at the end of '63 when I got off active duty from training with the Army Reserves. Met my wife, dated her a few months before she left Bethel. We had a blind date. And
so you met her.
She made me see.
Okay. So really, she was a sort of a hometown girl.
She was a home state girl. She'd gone to basically the same college my mother had gone to. My mother knew her in the school, so my mother had suggested to me that I contact Miss Abbott.
Kind of an arranged marriage then, huh?
Right. I took her advice.
I see. Well, there's a little bit about Pinkerton Academy that you were teaching at in Derry, New Hampshire. It's the largest independent high school in the country.
Right. Right.
And
it's a private school, but they don't have dormitory spaces. So each town that send students to like Gould Academy, they would send this. They would pay for the students to attend Pinkerton.
Yeah.
And that's where it is.
There's something about Alan Shepard in Pinkerton.
Yeah, Alan Shepard. In fact,
Now, who's Alan Shepard?
Alan Shepard is the first astronaut, right?
Oh, yeah, I
right.
remember him now.
Alan Shepard, Admiral Shepard,
Yeah.
and while we lived there 2 or 3 years, couple of years, to my knowledge, he didn't come back. If he came back, it was very low profile.
Yeah.
His parents would go meet him, but I did meet his father, who looked a lot like Alan. He was the bursar at Pinkerton Academy, where his son had graduated, and they used to be the Huskies, but they changed it to the astronauts, of course, when he became the famous astronaut that did that first suborbital flight for 30 minutes or whatever it was, a short time. And
so you decided to quit teaching at Pinkerton and moved over to Brunswick Naval Air Station. Portsmouth Shipyard, right?
Take additional courses, and during that period, it came to my attention that the shipyard, Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, was looking for 3 personnel types: personnel labor relations, personnel staffing, and position classification. Yeah. And I ended up. I guess I lost the draw. Maybe. I don't know. I was fortunate that I picked up the. I picked up and ended in classification because of the other fields. Yeah. Classification in Navy is the best because
Just what is classification?
look, it's a job analyst.
Okay.
Otherwise, it depends. You're basically analyzing work and determining whether it's prevailing rate, whether it's like a welder, or somebody in a blue collar end, or it's white collar, or whether it's general schedule, where it's that. That's sometimes an issue. Particularly in Navy, it was an issue at times.
There's qualifications
and then the title, series, and grade level.
Okay.
And some guy told me, Willard, he said, Willard, he says, I don't care what you call me, just give me the grade.
Call me anything, but pay me, huh?
Yeah, right. Call me late for lunch, but pay me.
But give me lunch. Okay, so then you went to Brunswick, and did you do similar job there?
Right.
Yeah.
At Portsmouth, I did another thing. One of the interesting things I had done at Portsmouth is I was a server. We had about maybe 50 to 70 civilians at the Portsmouth Disciplinary Command.
Oh.
If anyone saw the last detail, they were taking the prisoners from Norfolk up to Portsmouth, to the Portsmouth Brig, and I serviced that organization, and I'd have to visit that several times a year, going through the security where the prisoners, military prisoners, were kept. So I serviced the hospital that was in existence at the time, a naval hospital, small hospital, and a number of other organizations at the shipyard. And then my boss, he wasn't going to promote me, and I asked him later, somebody asked him, well, why did Willard leave the shipyard? And I said, well, Willard left the shipyard because I wouldn't promote him. So that's why I left. Well, I could see that. I mean, I was staying at a certain level, and I had an opportunity for promotion. They were desperate, really, to get any civilian to move to NAS Brunswick. I mean, who wanted to move except me? I was born 18 miles away in Lewiston from NAS Brunswick. And so I knew what I was getting into, and I enjoyed the tour there very much. Toward the end, I mean, I left Brunswick after a few years because I've been exposed to all the environmental situations. We serviced Cutler radio station with antenna mechanics from climbing antennas from 800 to 1,000 feet high.
Yeah. Well, you moved from Brunswick to Washington. You started working in the Navy.
There again, it was promotion.
Yeah.
And I was told by the bosses down, they got me the word that said, you accept this offer, or you probably never get another offer in Navy to go to Washington on a promotion. Well, so I accepted it.
And you also worked in the Defense Logistics Agency. And
there again, I took a lateral.
We're running sort of out of time. We've got about 5 minutes left. And I would like to get into speed skating.
Okay.
Because you were a coach. You started in '84 to become the speed skating coach for the Virginia Special Olympics. And you did it for 24 years. Right.
I'd seen a notice, they advertised a notice on a bulletin board at Mount Vernon Ice Rink for volunteers, skating volunteers. And I got into it, and I enjoyed being on the ice. I didn't mind standing around. A lot of the coaches on speed skating are standing around blowing whistles for speed skaters to start. Yeah. And then you're watching them on the turns and doing different exercises and things like that. And all about that same time, I played the music for the figure skaters who usually practice first.
So you became a jack of all trades, right? As well as speed coach.
The unique thing there was that I tried to do it, but I had to put my skates on before the figure skating practice because I didn't have time. Time is so valuable on the ice. They wanted to start right away with the speed skating, so I would stand in the booth. There were pictures of me standing in the booth and ice skating, but I always have my ice skating on. I'm a little bit higher than just normal because I have my I have my hockey skates on that I skated with.
Now, do you have any special people in the speed skating, the Special Olympics that you recall?
I worked. I also served as chaperone on trips. I drove at times. I had a deaf athlete who was blind in one eye, who was an expert knitter, and I would be responsible for him. Wow. I didn't sign. His signing with his parents, his mother told me, was kind of specialized between the two of them. But I would try to be careful to make sure that he was taken care of as far as restroom facilities and getting to meetings on time, because I would sleep in the same room with him as a chaperone on trips.
How about Frankie National?
Darnell was a speed skater, was one of our speed skaters. His father was a coordinator over me, and I worked with him. And he was a very good skater and won a gold medal in the World Games in Germany in about 1993.
Yeah. And this is a gold medal or medal that you won. Huh?
One night out of the blue, the figure skating coach, Sharon and myself were called over beside the rink, and they gave us, Fairfax County had decided to give us gold medals for our coaching efforts, and it's something I cherish. I hang it on the wall in our apartment. It reminds me of my good time. I also have a number of jackets. People notice my jackets from. I served as volunteers on my own to the World Games in Toronto in '97. I was at the speed skating venue, and in 2001 I was at the Anchorage. I volunteered and went on my own to the Anchorage Games, and I have jackets from that.
Yeah. You also have donated almost 60 gallons of blood. Here's
30.
Let's see.
238. Well, 230 divided by 8.
238
pints. Well, 240 pints will be 30, and I'm 2 pints shy.
Oh, okay.
And I alternate, so this arm will be 239, and then this arm will be 240.
Okay.
But who's counting, right?
All right. Now, you also said at the beginning that this is his first, the first card for.
That's typed on there at the top. It says 12/7/66. That was the New Hampshire, Vermont
That's right.
record indicator for blood donations at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. And it's just a coincidence. I always say it was a coincidence that they collected there on 12/7/66, which happens to be the 25th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, where Navy got hit terribly hard, of course. The Army did too, Army barracks, but
the Air Force,
but in the Air Force too, right.
Yeah.
But Navy.
One last thing. We talked about your picking up the Washington Post Express. How long have you been doing that?
Within a few months after I moved here, it just evolved. Things worked out that with the shuttle drivers, I'd go over at the second run because there's only I don't interrupt any of the normally the passengers coming back from Metro because it's 01. I catch a bus at 6:50 in the morning for Lee's Garden Ridge at 6:50, and then come back here a little after 7 and divide the papers up, whatever I have. A few weeks ago, I only had 25 papers, so if you didn't get a paper that day, that's why. And it gives me exercise. I can do it by myself, which I like that kind of. I guess growing up on a farm, I was used to spend a lot of time on a tractor mowing and doing other chores with a tractor. I did it myself. I didn't do it with other people.
Well, I would think though, it's been about 7 years, huh, that you've been doing this.
Right.
So you must be about ready to find somebody to help you, or
within a few years, I think.
Oh, you're going to do it.
I don't plan to do it beyond when I turn 80. I'll be turning 80 in a few years.
Okay.
So, but something might happen before that. I mean, I've had some minor health issues, but none of them have interfered with doing that. And I enjoy doing it. It gives me exercise, and you get into a habit of doing it.
Sure.
And, I guess a number of people have indicated they appreciate the fact that they got it because it's.
Ron, I appreciate very much your coming on Who's Who this morning. I've enjoyed talking with you, and I hope our residents have learned a little bit more about you, and I hope you enjoyed talking about it.
I have enjoyed it very much. Right.
Good. Well, we have a few announcements before we go.